What's up, good people? What's up, man? What's up? Welcome to the Ladder Podcast. It is your host, Justin Strickland. And I'm back, man, in this beautiful Black History Month, hanging out with my people. It's no place I'd rather be. And I'm so excited that you are deciding to spend some time with me. If you're new here, let me tell you what it's about, okay? The Ladder Podcast is a podcast about leadership. It is about how we can grow and develop as leaders, and that's not confined to title or to a position or anything of that nature. We believe everybody has a capacity for leadership. And so because of that belief, it is our hope to get you to the place where you are your best version of yourself. Because when you are the best version of yourself as a leader, the world is a better place. So we want to say thank you for hanging out with us today. I got a banger of an episode. We're going to stick with Black History Month, one of my favorite times of the year. I had a thought today, and I was like, because I live in Kansas City, right? And so in February, it's winter. And I was like, some people get Black History Month, and it's warm. I wonder if that's probably better. Like, if February was like hot, I think it would be my favorite month. No question, right? I think it would be dope. But because it's still cold outside, I'm like, love, hate. All right. But we're going to jump into it today. Last week's episode, I talked about the elimination of Black leadership, which I thought was really cool. I got some cool feedback from it. I hope you learned something. If you haven't checked it out, go ahead and do that right now and then come back to this video. Today, I'm going to talk about the Underground Railroad. And I thought the Underground Railroad was a really amazing topic when it comes to leadership because it's so unique and it has the nuance of different levels of leadership, different levels of responsibility, spheres of influence, different levels of sacrifice. I thought it was a really good kind of dual topic where it's like it's Black history, but we can definitely dive into it from a leadership perspective, which might be different than you've heard it or learned it before. Okay, so first, I have to do my due diligence. If you haven't heard about the Underground Railroad, it is a series of houses, shops, churches from the South to the North that was dedicated to freeing slaves during American slavery. The reason it's called the Underground Railroad is they use language just like the railroad. At the time, that was like the biggest business in industry, growing industry in America. The railroads were constantly building west and north and south and connecting people in a way that had never existed in America. And so the Underground Railroad was doing the same thing, but for African slaves. And so they used terms like conductors. Conductors were guides along the railroad that would get you from stop to stop. They had agents. Agents would help slaves find their way to the routes of the Underground Railroad. They had stations. These stations were places where people would hide. These were homes, farms, businesses, and churches. There were station masters. Those were the people that hid the slaves at the station. And then there was cargo, which referred to escaped slaves. The Underground Railroad even had stockholders. And these were people that donated money to different businesses, farms, homes to refit them, redesign them, or make them more useful for the Underground Railroad. And so that's why it was called the Underground Railroad, is because it really operated and functioned like a railroad, like the industry that was popular in that time. And so, like I said, it kind of developed organically. This slaves had always kind of been escaping. And I think that's one thing that we're not really taught in history. We taught about the Underground Railroad and different slave rebellions and things like that. But slaves, since they came to America, had always sought ways to escape, right? And so, but the railroad kind of developed organically where it became a system. And this guy named Levi Coffin. And so if you've studied the Underground Railroad, you know the Quakers were really instrumental in beginning to develop the system and organization of the railroad. And so this guy named Levi Coffin, he was 15 years old. The story goes, he knew where slaves were hiding and decided at 15 that he was going to help them. And so he began to help slaves hide in places that were more comfortable and like be a lookout for them. And so that kind of laid the foundation for what would become the Underground Railroad. And so today I want to talk about the different leaders in the Underground Railroad, their sacrifice or what they are, how they led, and how that leadership style or perspective is one that we can mimic today. Okay, so I'm going to go through some that you might not have heard of, and then I'm going to finish with the Michael Jordan of the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, all right? Or the LeBron James. I'm not here to debate it, all right? She to go. So I told you about Levi Coffin. He was pretty cool. And honestly, what I get from Levi is, as leaders, sometimes we just have to see opportunities and do what we know is right. One of my favorite quotes is, "It's always the right time to do the right thing." And so even though Levi was 15, most people say that's too young. There was no Underground Railroad at the time. There was no like systems or anything in place that would help him help these people. He just knew he saw vulnerable population and knew he could do something about it. And that's something that we can do today, right? It doesn't have to be super organized. It doesn't have to be super public. I know that's something that can be a struggle, and I'm not, and I'm kind of in between. I'm not saying you shouldn't film and post when you're doing good things, because I do think that we have to balance our media some way. But I'm saying you don't need to. So it's almost like if you see someone in need, you can help them even if the cameras aren't there, right? You can help them if you're not going to get any public recognition or acclaim for it. You can do it with whatever resources you have. And so Levi wasn't a rich man, right? He didn't have a car, but he knew these people are hiding here. I know a place that's safer. And he earned their trust, and he helped them get to a different safe place. And as the Underground Railroad developed, he stayed an important part of it. And so even as it grew outside of him and just what he could do, he didn't leave it, because that's what happens sometimes too. We start an initiative, we see someone needing help, and as soon as other people start doing it or outgrows us, we be like, "Man, I started this, man, and now they don't need me, or it's bigger than me," and we feel some type of way about that. It's about why are you helping, right? And so you're helping people because you think they need help and you can. And so that's something I think we can get from Levi. Now, let's talk about John Brown. John Brown is one of the most famous abolitionists. If you haven't heard of him, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him today. He was from the North. He started this group called the League of Gileadites, which I think is just a fun word to say. He was really about that life. Like, he was from the North. He was a part of the Underground Railroad, unashamedly, really. He was outspoken publicly, and eventually he was like, "Man, this ain't enough." And so he led the Harper Ferry Rebellion. If you can look this up in history if you want to do some more research on it. And basically they stormed a fort or a ferry. They took a whole bunch of guns. Him and his homies, the League of the Gileadites. I told you it's a fun word to say. They took a whole bunch of weapons. And they was like, "Man, forget all this secret stuff. We going down there and getting them." And so he went down to the South with his homies, and they start freeing slaves by gunpoint, rolling up on masters and slave hands and farm hands, and be like, "Hey, they free now. Put that whip down or it's off with your head," right? They freed some slaves. He got caught, got hung, publicly shamed. You know how the story go. How dare you? And that's kind of goes along the lines of what I was talking about in the last episode about systemic racism. When we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about the system punishing people based on how it deems who's responsible and who's worthy of protection. And so even though slavery was free in the North and slavery was illegal in the North and legal in the South, the country as a whole treated slavery as if it was right, even from people from the North, right? So it's interesting to think about that in that way. And so he was arrested, hung for treason, and that's the thing. It'd be different if John Brown was hung for property theft, right? Because then we could talk about legal ramifications of the slaves being held as property or anything like. He was hung for treason for freeing slaves, right? And I think it definitely was tied to him robbing Harper's Ferry. But it's interesting. So he had a militia, and even though he was a part of the Underground Railroad, he was like, "I need to go do something more." And so what the perspective I can get from that and how we can apply it today is sometimes you do need to do more. Right? Sometimes you're a part of a system and it's working, but it's slow, right? And it's changing, but not fast. And You need to step outside of that system to do more. If you can get a militia and go rob the Harper's Ferry, do it. Right? If you can go to the South and free more slaves in a different way, do it. And so, hopefully, you won't get hung for treason. But the ideal, the perspective is, I can do more. Like the system is this, and I'm cool in the system, but I can do more. And that's always appropriate as leaders. It's always appropriate to look at what's going on, look at the people you are leading or helping, and decide if you can do more. And if you can, you do it, right? And so we're talking about just taking actions within our means, influencing within our means, and leveraging that influence to help the people we're called to help. Jonathan Walker was another guy. He was a seaman, and so he had a ship. And back in the day, the waters, and it's still like this today. If you don't know a lot about like laws and stuff, waterways are very like gray areas with a lot of laws. And so he used his ship, his resource, to transport slaves. And they caught his ship with slaves on it. They arrested him. He was in the north, but they arrested him. And they branded him SS, slave stealer, on his hand. So that was to tell the people in the South, hey, if he's in your, area, watch out for him. Like that was something they would do. They would brand. And this was what's so interesting. Slavery was illegal in the North, but they caught him in the North with slaves, and they branded him so that the South, people in the South, could be comfortable with him. And so that's what I'm talking about, systemic things. That was a reaction to the South being upset with people from the North, even though they had different laws, right? It would almost be like right now with weed being legal in some places and not in some places. If, like right now, I live in Kansas City, so weed is legal in Missouri and it's illegal in Kansas. So what the North was doing was like basically so the North would be Missouri, right? Weed is legal. And the South will be Kansas. Weed is illegal. What the North was doing was saying, hey, if you brought weed from Kansas to Missouri, we're going to arrest you, right? Send you back to Kansas with the branding weed stealer. Like, that would be preposterous, right? That doesn't make sense to us. We can't comprehend that. Well, that's what they were doing because the system deemed these people, even if they were free in the North, as less than or maybe not even deserving of freedom according to the system. Now, individuals thought they were, and that's why guys like Jonathan Walker would do what they did. One thing we can learn from him is use your resources. So he had a ship, and he was like, I can put people on the ship. And so he used his resources to help the cause. If it's money, if it's time, if it's talent, whatever you have, lead with that and give that. I think sometimes we want to give what we see other people giving, right? And that's not the way it works. When we try to do that, we're not operating at our highest capacity. And so to operate in your highest capacity, your most efficient way is you have to give with what you have. If it's time, you give it. If it's money, you give it. If it's talent or any other resources, wisdom, whatever it is, just give it. And give it in a way that is leveraged correctly and delivered properly so that it maximizes the amount of people you can help and lead. John Fairfield, he's got a dope story. What I like about him is a lot of times when slaves were freed and they were on the Underground Railroad, they would leave people behind. This is, if you've read about slavery and things like that, this was a part of the breakdown of the black family and a lot of different traumatic things that have been passed down. But it would be like a father would leave or a son would leave or a wife would leave and the rest of the family wouldn't go. They could be scared. It could be timing. Sometimes a person would be in the field and be like, I'm done with this. And they would just take off. Sometimes they would organize and some people get cold feet. Whatever the case may be, they would be north without their family. John Fairfield would go back south and find people's family, right? He was like a private investigator for free slaves. And he would find people's family and help them free them. And it's kind of cool. He posed as a slave trader. And so he would pull up to a plantation or into a town and act like he was looking to purchase slaves or sell slaves. He would have black people, freed blacks with them and things like that. And he would help slaves escape. And they would often catch him. He actually got put in jail a few times. He escaped jail twice. He was pretty cool story. And what I love about John Fairfield is he used his cleverness and his wit to stand in a gap that most people wouldn't have even recognized, right? And so Underground Railroad was committed to getting people free. And what John Fairfield realized was even in people becoming free, there was still some gaps, right? And so what I mean by that is he recognized that you might be free, but it might be traumatizing if you know the rest of your family isn't. And so you can't even enjoy your freedom, right? Because you are thinking about all the people you left behind. It's called like survivor's guilt or survivor's remorse. And so he stood in a gap for something that the system had really kind of created, right? Because if the Underground Railroad doesn't exist and people don't get free, these families wouldn't have been split. And so even in doing something good, we can still have deficits and gaps. And so what we can do as leaders is take a step back and still view the process that might be overall good and stand in a gap where people have shortcomings or shortfall. I love the way that as leaders, some leaders are big picture, some leaders are targeted. And some leaders are saying, like, for example, let's say youth, and one of the issues in Kansas City is youth homelessness, right? We have a high number of youth homelessness. And so for some people, it's big picture. They are working to provide housing for the teens that are homeless, right? Which is important. But in providing homes for teens, right, some other people are more concerned with teaching teens how to manage new resources. So they teach them how to budget, how to get to work on time, how to create a schedule, things that you now need that you have a home that you didn't know you needed because you didn't have a home, right? And so it's important that we get these teens housed, but it's also important that someone comes alongside them and help them build skills so they can maintain and enjoy the new freedom or resources that they have. And so that's something we can learn from John Fairfield. Now, William Steele, I think William Steele is dope. It's a few slave movies where they talk about William Steele. The one I can remember on top of my head is 12 Years a Slave. William Steele is in that movie and is a character that portrays William Steele. The reason that William Steele is so important to us as far as the history of the Underground Railroad is concerned is he kept meticulous notes. And so he kept track of all the individuals that came through his station. He was a station master or conductor. And so all the individuals, he wrote their names down when they came to him, and he wrote the dates they were with them, where they came from, who their family was. And so he kept a ton of notes and was able to maintain history for people that would have been lost. And he was able to remain secret. He was a black man in Philly, and he kept his workings with the Underground Railroad secret until emancipation. And so he kept all these notes and didn't get arrested and didn't get killed or any of that because he was a very successful businessman. And so that was kind of his cover. He published it afterwards, and that's how we know a lot about what we know about the Underground Railroad. He was actually one of the close friends with Harriet Tubman. Like they were real tight because of his work on the Underground Railroad and her work. And so what William Steele did, and I think for my creatives, right? Sometimes when you're behind the camera or behind the artwork or behind the book, you think that you're not as important as the people the book is about or as important as the people on camera. Shout out to Big Nate. Like, it is important, if this is your gifting, for you to capture stuff, because that is a part of leadership. Preserving history, writing down history, communicating things that are happening is a part of leadership. That requires you to stretch your bandwidth, to use your talent, to leverage your resources, because there are people that we know about and we celebrate that we wouldn't know if people didn't take time to capture them, right? And so William Steele is one of great examples of someone using literacy and not necessarily his own public persona or his own public influence, but just recording the journeys of people and leading in the capacity where it's like, hey, this history exists. And we're grateful for that, because we wouldn't know any of these things if he hadn't captured that. And so if you're creative, if you're behind the camera, if you're behind the art, behind the faceless Instagram page, whatever it may be, your leadership is still vital to whatever in movement, whatever people you're called to. We still need you in this world, and so that's an encouragement to you. And now we're getting close. I got one more before I get to Harriet Tubman. So Frederick Douglass. Most people know him for his literary work. He published a newspaper, wrote books, and he was an abolitionist, public speaking. But he was a part of the Underground Railroad too, which I think is super dope. A figure as public as him, still putting his life on the line, leveraging his influence for and being like he wasn't too important to get his hands dirty. And I think that's something that leaders we can learn from. I think everybody respects the leader who cleans the toilet or who shows up when someone is missing. I think everybody respects the manager who, when someone calls out, they get on the fries, or and I think whenever as leaders, one thing we can do is remain grounded to why we do what we do, right? So like Frederick Douglass being an abolitionist, it would have been, in my mind, and probably in his mind, hypocritical for him not to be a part of the Underground Railroad, right? Like if you are talking about freeing slaves and you are writing about freeing slaves, then you gotta be, in a sense, freeing slaves. Like you gotta be, if you can be, you gotta be a part of it. And so I think it's dope. He recorded and kept track of a lot of his work. And honestly, his notoriety kind of provided him with some cover, because he was so famous. It was like people really couldn't mess with him in that sense, and so he had kind of some notoriety that he could leverage to help slaves get free. And so in recorded, I think he freed at least 400 slaves, and I think that's just super dope, right? And now to Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Harriet Tubman. She's by far and away the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. I'm gonna give you a little background on her story and go into the leadership principle we can learn from her. So if you hung around till now, thank you. You about to get some gold. Okay, so her story is super interesting. She was born a slave in Maryland, and as she grew up, eventually her two brothers got free. They escaped to freedom. But what's so interesting is they went back to slavery. So they got free, and then they went back to the plantation, and they were slaves again. And then Harriet was like, man, this really sucks. And so she escaped again and was like, man, y'all was tripping. I don't know why we came back. So she escaped again. And then while she escaped, she's living, she's free, and she's like, man, I miss my people. So she started sneaking onto the plantation she was from and getting people free. And then eventually she got married, and she escaped without her husband. So eventually she comes back. She's like, all right, it's time for you to go. I got a place for us. We can make it out. Her husband had remarried to another slave and was like, I'm not going. I'm staying on the plantation, which to everyone around sounds crazy. But at the time, I mean, I don't know if I blame him. It's a hard situation to think about. But basically he was like, I'm married to this new woman now. You left and I'm going to stay with her. And so after that encounter completely changed the trajectory of Harriet Tubman's life. And so she left the plantation and vowed to help all slaves get free. And not just her family and not just the people she knew. And so she went back and forth, depends on the source, tons of times, right, to the South, and freed thousands of slaves through her work in the Underground Railroad. We know about her. She carried a shotgun, and she would threaten people who got cold feet along the route and be like, hey, I can either shoot you with this shotgun or we can walk through this river. You choose. She slept with it. And for all reports, bro, she was not to be messed with. She was hey, she was on that time, standing on business about that life. All of the above. And it's so interesting. She was one of the few conductors that didn't stop in Northern America, but would take slaves all the way to Canada. In her movie, that's actually the end of it, which is kind of cool, is like they had established a whole free slaves community in Canada. And then you can do the research and history of that. You can go visit some of those places still to this day where free slaves kind of established cities and towns in Canada. And Harriet Tubman was a large piece in that. And so there are a few things we can take from Harriet Tubman. One is, it's even though we see an issue, it's often bigger than what we first think. And so in Harriet's life, her first mission was just to free the people she knew and free the slaves that she had grown up with. And it wasn't until one of them pushed back on accepting her help that she was like, wait a minute, this might be a bigger problem. And so sometimes it is like, man, I want to set up money for my family, or I want to teach the people I grew up with. I want to change the way they view the world or their perspective. And that's our first mission field as leaders. But oftentimes in the midst of doing that work, we are confronted with the idea that there are more people that need our help than we can immediately touch or know. And so Harriet comes across that, and instead of shrinking, right, and being like, it's too many, she went after it. And that's what we can do. And mind you, she didn't free every slave, but she freed as many as she could. And I love her. Everybody knows her famous quote. It's like, I freed thousands of slaves. If they would have knew they were slaves, I could have freed millions of slaves. And it's not a reflection of her leadership. I think that's something we can learn from her too, is Harriet Tubman's failures. Like, she comes to plantations, 100 slaves, 10 of them leave. A 10% success rate didn't mean she was a failure, right? And that wasn't how we judged how accomplished she is as far as her leadership. What we did judge is, who did she get to go? Because what we understand is changing people is hard. And so as leaders, if we're able to, we're not counting who we miss out on or who we don't influence. We're asking, who do we impact? And how deep and how wide can that impact be? And we're just judging our success based on that. Are we impacting the most possible people? Right? Because there's some people who just don't want to hear you. They don't like the way you dress. They don't like the way you talk. They don't like the way you walk. They don't like where you're from. They're just not going to respond to your leadership. That's cool. If the people that are willing to respond, though, how do you lead them? Are you impacting them? Are you helping them get free? And so that's something we can take from her. And then the last thing is, trust your gut. Trust your gut. If you know something is wrong and you know something is right, count the cost and trust your gut. Harriet Tubman put her life on the line over and over and over again. She had a bounty on her head from the American government. People was trying to catch her. He was trying to put her, they was trying to hang her. They was trying to do all this stuff to her. And that did not keep her from doing what is right. And so a lot of us face a lot less pressure than that on doing what is right. A lot of us face like a couple friends looking at us different, you know what I mean? Maybe we might miss out on a couple hours of sleep, lose a couple dollars. And so count the cost and be courageous. I think courage is one of the most underrated character traits a leader can have. And so I hope that as you all are just doing inventory on how you've led so far in your life, you are challenged and convicted in a healthy way that pushes you to be more courageous, that pushes you to do more with what you have, and that honors the work you've done. Because as leaders, it can be lonely, it can be exhausting, but like I said, don't look at the people who you haven't led. Count the people who you've helped, and allow that to invigorate you and give you energy for more leadership in the future. And so, as we keep trekking through this Black History Month, I hope you learned something today about the Underground Railroad. And If there's someone that you didn't know, drop their name in the comments, because I'm interested to see what people that I spoke about are common knowledge and what people that was like, I never heard of them before. So I'm gonna run through their names again, because you didn't know I was gonna ask you that. So the people I talked about were Levi Coffin, John Brown, Jonathan Walker, John Fairfield, William Steele, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman. And these are just a few of the leaders along the Underground Railroad, and I dropped a few of the lessons we can learn from their leadership style and perspective. And so thank you as always for hanging out with your boys, spending a little bit of your time, and I hope that you are courageous. Until next time, I'm going to holler at you, man. Peace.